My name is Johan Voordouw. I'm an associate professor at the Israeli School of Architecture and Urbanism at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. My paper is entitled Between Sites of Built Heritage, Thickening the Matrix of Collective History. The key words for the paper are world heritage, research creation, and mapping. And for expediency, I will use the first half of my abstract to frame my talk. Between Sites of Built Heritage studies how architectural representation might describe multiple overlapping geographies, typologies, and chronologies of built heritage. The paper and its associated visual work examine World Heritage Sites in Canada. It explores the commons between sites of cultural heritage and how that ground might cover many parallel, conflicting, and converse stories. It is part of a larger, ongoing research project entitled Cultural Alignments, which aims to examine regional and global narratives as a commentary on present-day heritage and their delineations. To give a brief overview, the foundation for the creation of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, was established in the interwar period, with UNESCO's constitution adopted in London in 1945 and implemented the following year. As written by the organization, it contributes to peace and security by promoting international cooperation through education, science, culture, communication, and information. UNESCO promotes knowledge sharing and the free flow of ideas to accelerate mutual understanding and a more perfect knowledge of each other's lives. As described by Christina Cameron, in the beginning, UNESCO sought, like many modernizing projects, to develop global standards to protect and use cultural heritage, build technical capacity, and safeguard threatened heritage sites. As Cameron continues, from a philosophical perspective, the conceptual framework underpinning these international instruments are being reevaluated in light of present-day values and perceptions of fairness. The Cultural Alignments Project examines cultural landscapes, a definition established in 1992 with the aim of bridging culture and nature. Last year, UNESCO celebrated the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, and with that came a reflection on its future. Some of the key directions included enhancing resilience and sustainability, training and increasing representation and equity among heritage professionals, and harnessing digital technology. Cultural Alignments is in the early stages, but at its core, it aims to expand notions of heritage by activating the buffer that surrounds heritage sites and to thicken the matrix by revealing the underlying connections that tie heritage not just to their local environments, but as a web of place. The maps I present today are part of a larger project and is based on an idea that has been percolating for almost 2 decades. So this image here is a competition entry all the way back in 2008. And so the current project asks, how can mapping reveal latent connections that might expand our understanding of the historical and present-day forces that affect and define heritage sites? It aims to take a layered, pluralistic, interconnected position to heritage sites and their surroundings and to use visual tools of mapping to register causal effects. To help set out the initial framework, I used 3 sub-themes to help organize the initial linking of World Heritage Sites. The first sub-theme is geography. Where is the site located, but more importantly, to what other sites is it proximate? The idea of this project started when I walked between 2 sites that were geographically close, but in every other manner were worlds apart. The second sub-theme is chronology, the period in which the main cultural events of a site took place and their duration. Some sites are brief, but critically important, of a particular moment in history. Others are perennially amended, an impasto of images and ideas jockeying for attention. Chronology also considers the vast array of activities taking place at any time, or in some cases, the similar practices that take place in similar time periods but across vast expanses of space. So for example, the rock paintings that are simultaneously present in Spain, South Africa, and Australia. Last, to build on this idea of rock paintings is type. that certain practices occur in many places and often over vast periods of time. The methodology for this research is that at its core it's a research creation project, and as such it uses drawing as a research tool. In this reciprocal arrangement, drawing informs research as much as the research then further informs drawing. The main visual output for the project will be a catalog of sites and a series of maps which are layered in multi-scalar. The practice of this work involves using open sources, particularly the UNESCO World Heritage website. Once a base is established, other maps are used to develop a more holistic picture of the heritage site and its surrounding environment. These maps are all traced in Rhino 7, some elements are digitally modeled, particularly landscapes, and once the various elements have been completed, they are composed with the aim of revealing latent relations and expanding the protected landscapes beyond their buffer zones. Currently, the main difficulties experienced so far in the research is the connections and recognizing that each site is unique, is the difficulty of using layers in varied scale while retaining clarity, and it's to figure out how images can reveal a story when often these stories are carried through oral or written words. To that end, the maps aim in time to become more three-dimensionalized, like my previous work finished in 2009. They aim to become more sculptural and to use fabrication techniques such as laser cutting, CNC milling, and 3D printing to create depth and the necessary hierarchy to convey the main thoughts that bind each heritage site to their wider surroundings. Like this previous project, these maps are intended not as a solution to the future of heritage, but as a discursive object that allows stakeholders from very disciplinary backgrounds to come together and to converse. So to describe how one of the maps comes together, I grew up in the city of Calgary in the province of Alberta. In looking at the World Heritage Sites, there are 4 sites that are relatively close together, and they're all ones that I visited as a child. Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump, Writing on Stone Provincial Park, the Canadian Rocky Mountain Parks, and Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. So for familiarity and geographic proximity, I use these 4 sites as a starting point. These 4 sites divide equally into cultural and natural sites. They are located across 2 provinces, so British Columbia to the west and Alberta to the east, 2 countries, Canada to the north and the United States of America to the south, and federal, provincial, indigenous, and private land. In some cases, such as the Head Smashed In, the site boundary follows the colonial structure of the township and range system, while in the mountain parks and Writing on Stone, it follows the topography of place. My initial interest was what might bind these 4 sites together. At first I examined geology, that they were all generally in line with the Rocky Mountains, which stretches to the south that also encompass a 5th World Heritage Site, which is Yellowstone National Park. I also considered the last glacial period to see if that might have had a binding effect on the landscape. Through research, however, I settled on bison, the primary herbivore that in the early 1800s stretched across the North American continent east of the Rocky Mountains and numbered in the hundreds of millions of animals. Bison fundamentally reshaped the natural environment of the Rocky Mountain Parks and Waterton Glacier and served as the impetus for the formation of a 6th World Heritage Site, which is the National Park Service, which was formed at Yellowstone. They were indelible to Indigenous culture, and furthermore, in northern Alberta is another World Heritage Site, Wood Buffalo National Park, that was established in part to ensure the continuity of the survival of the species. As such, I considered what it means for multiple sites to be bound and yet for them to be missing this important link. To stare off the cliff edge at Head Smashed In across the Western Plains and not to see any bison is a fundamentally skewed representation of the site and protects only the landscape as a fixed object as opposed to a living thing. From that position, I began to investigate the degree to which cultural sites were the only examples of cultural activity, or whether they were the primary examples within a network of related sites. So concurrent to this research, I'd started examining early sites in Portugal, Spain, Gibraltar, and France. And sites like Altamira are the rock art of the Iberian Peninsula, which have multiple sites encompassing one World Heritage designation. So in the case of the rock arts of the Iberian Peninsula, the designation is made up of 797 sites across hundreds of kilometers along the eastern flank of Spain's Mediterranean coast. Regarding buffalo jumps, there are approximately 200 jumps in southern Alberta and in Montana alone. While this is less true for petroglyph sites, of which the writing on stone is one, there are many petroglyph sites based in the Canadian Shield, which is a rock band that forms from the east to northeast. There's more petroglyph sites on the west coast of Canada, and there's also sites in the Arctic. As a result, the protection of one buffalo jump and one petroglyph site reinforces the notion of the so-called New World as a terra nullius, or alternatively as the empty land myth. The colonial imaginary that Canada, and particularly the large western and central plains, was an empty space prior to European settlement, and that the evidence for its occupation is sparse and sporadic. It continues to see Canada, and particularly the vast West, for its natural beauty, but this beauty is purely hinged on the sublime majesty of the mountains and not the remarkable foothills or plains that expand from this hulky rocky edge. In closing this line of thinking, it parallels Paulo Tavares's work for the Amazon in Brazil, recognizing this vast interior not as a natural landscape, but as a fully articulated cultural landscape that was highly organized and filled with inhabitation. To this degree, this first map aims to use bison, but also the unprotected sites to bring attention to the underrepresentation of indigenous sites of heritage and raise awareness of the highly developed series of sites that were deeply tied to the landscape and its resources. In conclusion, I move back to the abstract of my text to describe the second half of my initial proposal. In it, I articulate a series of questions. Some of these are still in the nascent stage of development, but others are precipitating answers. And so I follow with 4 questions. And so the first question is, how might we describe a place that situates 6,000 years of indigenous evidence of occupation in relation to a site that is some 3,100 kilometers away and barely 250 years old? So in this question, I am alluding to how we might connect a site such as Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump to another World Heritage Site in Canada, which is the Rideau Canal. Located in Ottawa, the nation's capital city, it is a historic cut of military infrastructure, a key nation-building project from the mid-19th century as British North America protected its economic interests following a series of wars with an emergent independent America to the south. Moving forward, I aim to research the organization of land and its articulation of ownership and defense as a compelling counterpoint to the free movement of the bison. So my second question is, how might these two sites possibly define the breadth and richness of interwoven, overlapping, and messy culture? So this last slide that I present in this talk is where my map currently stands. And so I do have to articulate this question carefully, as I cannot speak on behalf of cultures which are not my own. But in this initial research, particularly in Canada, there are indigenous sites, 11th century Viking settlements such as L'Anse de Meadow. There's a 17th century Basque whaling station called the Red Bay. There's French fortifications in Quebec City and the British seaside towns of Lunenburg. It means that Canada is tied to many places far past its borders. It acknowledges that individuals came from many corners and across many routes as they occupy Canada's vast and varied landscape. So a third question might be, can we simultaneously understand two such remarkably different places, such as the Rideau Canal and Head Smashed In, on their own terms? And so as the project progresses, I'm not sure that question matters as much anymore. What it does need to be amplified is that each place has a myriad of vectors and forces that reveal its effects, and that each of these is worthy of study, discussion, and protection. And like all places, Canada is not one thing, nor is there only one Canada. And so the last question that was originally in my abstract is, how might our vocation visualize discrete sites that sit in such incredible isolation while acknowledging the space in between, especially if this space has no internationally awarded heritage value? So for this last question, I aim to argue that for sites such as Head Smashed In, Buffalo Jump, or Writing on Stone, we have an obligation to acknowledge that there is more than one site, that these places do not sit in isolation, and that they are not discrete. What is valuable when protecting heritage is the ability to celebrate this matrix of difference and advocate for a broad tapestry in which sites mix, overlap, push and pull a shared history. Thank you very much for listening.